Well, good morning, everyone. It's absolutely wonderful to be here at your beautiful campus here at City University in Hong Kong, one of my very favorite cities, next to, of course, my own, Singapore, which is where I'm from. But once again, good morning, all of you. I'm Sharanjit Lal from the BBC. Now, of course, you heard our opening speeches this morning from our very important panel of speakers. You heard Ms. Yvonne Choi, the Commissioner of BeltOne Road from Hong Kong here, mention earlier that next week, of course, hundreds of interested parties are going to be descending onto Beijing for the very first One Belt, One Road forum. And of course, the meeting is going to bring together lots of very important people, heads of states, policymakers, non-government organizations, multilateral development banks, all to make the ambitious One Belt, One Road a reality. Now, of course, we all know the history. In 2013, President Xi Jinping of China made this ambitious plan to connect the ancient Silk Road by rail and road, and also to create a maritime Silk Road that would join together shipping trade routes. And of course, we know the project is going to cover some 60 different countries. Now, the cost of this ambitious One Belt, One Road is estimated to be enormous. About $900 billion of planned investments already in the pipeline, but we know costs are expected to escalate as into the trillions, possibly, as more projects come on board. Some of this, of course, will come from China's own enormous resources, but naturally such an ambitious project will require investments from many different sectors, including companies and private industry. So today we ask the very important question: how can the international community help China operationalize the One Belt, One Road initiative and develop more people-first public-private partnerships? And of course, we have a mix of voices from both the private and public sector today and a multilateral development bank to help answer that crucial question. And I shall introduce our speakers onto the stage now. First off, we have Ms. Annie Wu, the Standing Committee member of the National Committee of Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference and lifetime honorary board member of the World Trade Centers Association. Please give Ms. Wu a big round of applause. And then we have Mr. Xiaoping Chen, the CEO of Everbright International. Mr. Chen. And Sir Danny Alexander, the Vice President of AIIB. Mr. Chris Heathcote, the CEO of Global Infrastructure Hub. Mr. James Stewart, the Chairman of PPP Business Advisory Board. And finally, our wonderful host, Professor Humin Yan, the Dean of the College of Business here at City University in Hong Kong. Welcome to all of you. Now, I briefly mentioned your titles at the start, but I just wanted to possibly give you about 2 to 5 minutes for each of you to briefly talk about what you do in your own words, describe your roles, and how these roles fit into the much larger picture, the context of the One Belt, One Road. So, shall we start with you, Mr. Chen?
我是光大国际 CEO 陈小平，今天是以私人企业的身份参加这个会议的。光大国际是以环保、节能环保为主的一家上市公司，在香港的上市公司。光大国际现在有6大业务板块，第一是环保能源，就是不废变能源的板块；第二个板块是环保水务。 主要是做水环境治理，给水资源的综合利用。这家公司也在新加坡上市。
handling, and this is also Singapore listed, and also rural areas waste, and also industrial waste. This sector yesterday had just spun off as a separate listed vehicle in Hong Kong. And also in terms of equipment and devices for conservation and environmental protection, and also scientific research as well. And also we have an international area. We have 3 listed companies, 6 main sectors of business. This is us, Everbright International. When we invest in projects, in industrial build-up, in operation management and scientific research, and also in device and equipment production, we are all integrated. We are also a high-tech company because Everbright in Hong Kong had for continuously 3 years at the Hang Seng Continuous Development or Sustainable Development Index. We have been included into that index for 3 years. And also for Dow Jones Index, we have also been included as a sustainable development company. And for the listed companies in Hong Kong, we are the only company which had access the Dow Jones Sustainable Development Index company. So this is my introduction. Thank you.
My name is Annie. I'm a local person. I was born and brought up in Hong Kong, educated in Hong Kong, and then studied overseas in UK, USA. Started my first job in Japan in Osaka in 1970. That gave me an exposure of what we call international spirit and also globalization. And then after that, I went back to Hong Kong and then started my work here. In 1978, I was very lucky that the late Mr. Deng Xiaoping opened the doors to do business in mainland China. So together with my father, we opened the first joint venture in Beijing, this joint venture 001, Beijing Air Catering Limited. And then from that onwards, we actually introduced the Hong Kong company laws and Hong Kong accounting system to China. So since then, we have been doing joint ventures in China, and also we have been taking Chinese delegations to look overseas since 1980. So back in 1991, 92, at that time, Beijing needed some fundraising. So we helped them to launch the first company in Hong Kong to raise about 500 million Hong Kong dollars to Beijing city government. On and on, I think I've been trying to serve our country as a super connector, using Hong Kong as a platform. And this is what we have been doing in different types of business and different types of ventures. And now with the One Belt, One Road, we want to use Hong Kong as the platform to bring more business from overseas, to use Hong Kong as a base to do the One Belt, One Road developments and infrastructures, and vice versa. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Chris Heathcote. I head up the Global Infrastructure Hub. The Hub is a G20 organization that was set up by the G20 to help improve the flow of fundable infrastructure projects. The G20 were concerned that there was a lot of private sector money that wanted to be invested in infrastructure. There was a lot of infrastructure that needed building, but somehow the money and the projects weren't meeting each other. We have a number of different roles. They include collecting best practice and making sure that's available to governments and to the private sector. We have a role of creating new tools and standardized products to help speed up procurement. And we have also created a global project pipeline, which at the moment has 10 countries and about 70 projects on it, including China. And that pipeline has, at the moment, investors from over 100 countries looking at it, more than 1,500 individual people searching that pipeline. We're also of particular interest to One Belt, One Road. We're also a partner of the Global Interconnectivity Alliance, the GICA, which is an organization that was set up on the back of China's presidency of the G20, and that organization is looking at the challenges of creating projects that span borders between countries. Thank you.
My name is Danny Alexander. I'm a Vice President of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, or AIIB. The AIIB was established, started work in January of last year. It's a multilateral Development Bank. It was created by 57 member countries coming together to establish this new institution, which has a particular remit to invest in infrastructure projects which help to support the sustainable economic development of Asia. We have three particular priorities. The first is sustainable infrastructure, because the challenge of climate change in Asia and around the world is huge and will require many different kinds of infrastructure to be built. The second is connectivity, building connectivity between countries and within countries in Asia. The third is to support the greater mobilization of private sector capital to help ensure that the large gap between the needs that Asia has in terms of infrastructure and the available finance can be bridged, because public sources like ours and like governments and other multilateral development banks like the World Bank or the Asian Development Bank, between us we do not have the resources alone. Private sector investment is going to be absolutely crucial to meeting those goals. From the perspective of this forum, it's important to say, of course, the AIB will invest in some projects that are linked to One Belt, One Road, will invest in some projects that are not linked to One Belt, One Road. But all of the projects that we support will be based on our own strategies and conformity with our own policies and standards. And we set the same high international standards as our peer organizations like the Asian Development Bank and the World Bank. We're also a start-up institution, so we're still very much in the growth phase of the AIB, and so events like this are an important opportunity to listen as well as to speak. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name's James Stewart. I wear two hats, really, today. My primary hat is I am chairman of the Business Advisory Board that supports the UNECE's PPP program and activities, and that involves supporting the development of standards, linking the infrastructure PPP program with the SDGs, and also we send missions from the Business Advisory Board to various countries in the UNECE network. My other hat, my day job, is I am chairman of KPMG's global infrastructure business, and obviously we cover a lot of the countries on the One Belt, One Road. And I think my interest this morning is linking the One Belt, One Road initiative with the SDGs, linking it with the People-First PPP program. And then lastly, I'm also interested in actual projects and how the international private sector supply network is going to engage with One Belt, One Road. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Ho Ming Yan. I'm Dean of Business at the City University of Hong Kong. So my another role is I'm taking a position at the City University. We have a center with the United Nations, which was on the agreement of NDRC and the United Nations, UNECE, and jointly work with the Tsinghua University, and we try to build up excellence in PPP. And I also taking a position as a City University Center, Research Center for One Belt and One Road initiatives. My role, to a certain extent, I mean, we all know it's education and research. In particular, associated with the PPP and OBOR initiative, what we do at the City University, we do two things. One, it's capacity building, I mean, human capital capacity building in terms of what is the education components associated with public-private partnerships, business models, contract laws, and we also heavily involved with an OBOR initiative on the educational component. And another role I play, it's with the work with UNECE and also with UNECE other centers. We try to contribute in UN's initiative on the standards. Sustainable development goals and PPP standards, and we try to document what are the basic practice in the region, in Hong Kong, in the surrounding regions, and try to support other centers to share with our experience. Those are the major activities we are doing at the City University. And let me take this opportunity also welcome everyone for flying for 100 miles to Hong Kong. I hope you all have a good stay at the City University at Hong Kong. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. It's great knowing exactly how you fit into this debate. You all have very crucial roles to play. And of course, at the very start, I laid down the scope and ambition of the One Belt, One Road. And perhaps the sheer cost is one of the reasons that PPP figures so strongly in China's plans for it. So tell us a little bit more about that and what's some of the other concerns China has. Why is it looking towards PPP, specifically People-First PPP? And anyone can jump in at this stage.
我觉得“一带一路”，我觉得应该源自于历史上
One Belt, One Road starts from the history of the Silk Road and the Maritime Silk Road. One Belt, One Road, even if this has been initiated by the Chinese government, but I think the development concept of One Belt, One Road is beyond China. For the countries along the One Belt, One Road, there are 4.4 billion people, and they account for 2/3 of the global population. We also have GDP totally about $20 trillion, accounting for 29% of the global GDP. In this region, we have the two countries with the largest population in the world, China and India. In this region, in history, we used to have economic prosperity, the intercommunication between countries, and the promotion of manufacturing. They were all complementary and helping each other to assist the prosperity along the One Belt, One Road in history. Among the countries along the One Belt, One Road, we also have immense business opportunities. In addition, there are immense potentials for growth. Therefore, I believe going around One Belt, One Road initiative, it is not the job of a certain country. This is the responsibility of all the countries along the One Belt, One Road, and to look for opportunities for your specific country. And this is a very large field, and I also believe that this is one of the most important steps for the future economic development of the world. Last year, in terms of our business, from the domestic environmental business, we have moved outside of China, going global. We are now in Poland, Vietnam, Germany. We all have our projects. Whilst promoting the business, besides the international projects and the promotion of the domestic projects, we now cover 80 cities. We have over 200 projects in China, and these projects, strictly speaking, they are closely connected with today's theme. All our projects basically is for BOT, TOT, BT. These are our running formats. They are based on the PPP model to promote the development of our projects. In addition, by doing so, we are also promoting the infrastructure buildings in all these cities and local governments. Thank you.
I think one of the challenges for One Belt, One Road is that we all believe infrastructure supports economic growth, and that was the point very ably just made. But that doesn't happen automatically. It's not a given that if you build a piece of infrastructure, you will then create a vibrant economy around it. And one of the challenges for any government is working out which projects they should prioritise and which projects are most likely to drive growth. One of the benefits of going down a PPP route and bringing in private sector finance is not just that you bring in finance, that can help, but doesn't necessarily help. What it does bring in is a set of disciplines about the selection of the project, making sure the project is the right project, making sure that it links through to the economic growth potential within the region, and making sure that as the project is built and operated, it is operated to support that economic growth. But another point to add onto the back of that discipline is the discipline around sustainability. I spend a lot of time talking to the private sector, and I'm getting more of the private sector coming to me and saying that sustainability is becoming one of their top 3 concerns on infrastructure. And by sustainability, they're talking about that piece of infrastructure operating effectively for 20 years to create a flow of dividends for them. But in the end, what they're really talking about is making sure that the piece of infrastructure they're building incorporates the needs of the local people as well as provides that growth potential. I think all of these difficult and sometimes contradictory strands can be best dealt with by private sector looking at it and saying, if I'm putting my money to work here, what needs to happen to make that effective? By doing that, you tend to avoid some of the white elephants we've seen in the past. So I think that's another reason for using PPPs.
It's become commonplace in international discussions over the past few years, and certainly since the financial crisis in 2008, for there to be an emphasis on the importance of infrastructure investment as a way of sustainably raising the productivity of economies, of bringing countries closer together, of enhancing international trade in a sustainable way. You see that in G20, you see that in EU discussions, you see that in all sorts of international fora. And I think it's one of the reasons why there's so much interest in the One Belt, One Road initiative that China is taking from many countries around the world, is because it fits very much into that context of economic policymakers who see that infrastructure investment is absolutely crucial to sustainable economic growth. And investment in infrastructure in Asia is particularly critical because this is the region that is going to lead world economic growth. It has the most people, it has the most growth potential, and so on. But equally, it's also a region where the degree of economic integration between countries in many cases is still very, very low if you compare it to other parts of the world, which is why infrastructure investment is absolutely crucial. It's why the AIB has been formed, it's why many other things are going on. But the private capital dimension is critically important for the reasons that Chris said. And let me just add some numbers to give a flavor for it. If you look at the Asia region, recent study by McKinsey suggested that the infrastructure need between 2015 and 2030 would be $38 trillion. Now, there's a wide variety of different estimates. But the crucial fact there was that they think that there's about 17 trillion of funding likely to come forward. So you've got a funding gap of $21 trillion. That gap cannot be bridged by international institutions, by domestic governments, by taxpayers in various guises. In order to get to the point where the infrastructure investment is to the level that meets the needs of the region, much greater amounts of private capital are going to have to be mobilized. And that requires many things. It requires high standards. It requires secure projects that can be invested in, financeable projects coming forward. That's a big issue in many countries. And PPP is one aspect of how some of that reassurance can be delivered to private sector investors to get them comfortable to invest in those projects. But if you think about it in that bigger sense of the huge scale of the need and the vital economic living standards and environmental sustainability benefits that will be delivered by the right kind of infrastructure, I think that explains why there's so much interest at the moment in these initiatives.
Okay, let me add in a little bit historical perspective into this discussion. We all recognize finance, it's one of the key issues, and there's a gap between the need of infrastructure and the money like AIIB has now. My friend and my colleague, Erica Collin, which he's in the audience, introduced me a book, Silk Roads, written by Peter Frankopan, who's a scientist, he's a historian from UK. That records the ancient Silk Road, the trade. And people in the first place might think about the Silk Road. Silk is the product which is shipping from China to Europe. Yes, that's probably the product, but the silk at that point of time is the currency, it's the money. So you give me goods, I give you silk. So therefore, goods from China, when they move to the Mongolia, they sell 50% of their product and carry on with another 50% of the Mongolia good, continue going on to the Russia, they sell another 50%. The goods from China, the remaining is only a quarter. So what I'm trying to say, if you look at the historically, our ancient, they are sort of the creator ways which collaborate with the people in the local. They focus on one hand on the international trade, they're also looking into the local trade. So therefore, I'm trying to echo my other colleagues, and the PPP probably is one of the vehicles which is promoting local and people involved with this, many other infrastructure projects which might need money. Thank you.
Yeah, just to add a comment. I think PPPs can fill financing gaps, can fill skills gap, can provide innovation, everything else. The one thing they can't do is fill a funding gap. And what I mean by that is how the cash flow is generated to actually pay for a project, and which is picking up Danny's point about financeable projects. And many of these projects, One Belt, One Road projects, are going to be in pretty difficult countries, in low-income countries, where funding is going to be a real issue. And to me, we have to think very carefully about where the money is going to come from, what support is going to be available from outside those countries. Will China be providing grants of some sort, actual grants for these projects? What credit enhancement will be available to support what will be fairly risky cash flows, and where are those credit enhancement projects going to come from? But I think we can get seduced by PPP, but let's all remember it's not free money.
As a person from the private sector, I think it's important that how we view Hong Kong as a place for all the PPP startup place. Because Hong Kong, for the last, I would say, more than 50 years, we have been a place for entrepreneurs. And it's a small place, but we are very much, I would use the word knowledge-based economy now. And also for Hong Kong, for so many years, we have been very accustomed to the Western system of business ethics, management, and our rule of law and our accounting system is all in line with the Western countries. So basically, a lot of companies, like even China Everbright, they started the company in Hong Kong in, I think, 1996, before 1997. And even a lot of the MNC, multinational companies, they use Hong Kong as a very flexible place for doing international business, not only with mainland China. In the view of the One Belt, One Road development in future, when you talk about PPP, Hong Kong's offered the flexibility of fundraising through IPOs and through other kind of activities. And also Hong Kong, the government here is a very laid-back, laissez-faire government, and we have very low taxation. And also we have biculture, and our language for English is, I would say, compared to the rest of the Asian countries, we are still a little bit better than them. And also because of the base of the SOE from mainland China and all the important projects like along the One Belt, One Road, we can provide expertise and know-how. And even back in 1997, when a lot of the people retired from Hong Kong airport, they did not return to UK. They retired to Dubai and helped to build the Dubai airport of today. This is Hong Kong.
Thank you all. Well, you all bring up very valid points, which I hope to come back later. We've got an hour left in our discussion, so a lot to squeeze in. But Obviously, as a journalist, the criticism, and I'm just getting this out of the way very early, there's a huge criticism about One Belt, One Road, that it's really meant to increase China's political and economic influence around the world, that the focus really is on projects that benefit China's international interests. So how do you counter this idea that has taken hold in much of the media, and how do you gain international trust so that money starts to flow into these projects?
Let me make a comment on that first. I mean, I would go back to what I said in answer to the earlier question, actually, which is that for China to reach the status of a middle-income country, it requires also its neighboring markets to get stronger. You often hear Chinese leaders using the phrase win-win cooperation. It's mutually, and that is one of the things about infrastructure. It's mutually beneficial. If you build links between countries, if you enable trade to flow back and forward, there is an economic advantage to both parties for that. If it's a good project that is financeable and has a real economic development benefit, then everybody gains from that. And it's important to say it's not only China that is talking about the importance of infrastructure investment to lifting the world economy. Actually, pretty much every country in the world is talking about that in different ways. In the UK, when I was in the Minister in the Treasury between 2010 and 2015, we put in place a national infrastructure plan. We took certain decisions like creating a green investment bank, all designed to increase the flow of infrastructure projects in the UK. The EU has the Juncker plan, also designed to increase investment in infrastructure projects. And so, of course, every country has their own reasons for pursuing their policies, but I think that the reason why this attracts interest from many other countries is because there is a mutual benefit to investing in infrastructure that supports economic growth and which supports greater economic integration, which is to the mutual benefit of all those who are taking part. And of course, no country needs to allow a project to take place on their territory that they don't want, and multilateral institutions like ours exist where we can fund projects that are to high standards, that meet environmental standards and social standards, that are openly procured and those things. So again, organizations like ourselves, the Asian Development Bank, the World Bank, we can help to ensure that the projects we're involved in are done to the best and highest international standards.
James?
Yeah, I mean, just to add to what Danny said, I mean, you know, there is a global competition going on at the moment amongst countries to export its own talent and expertise into the world of infrastructure. I mean, you know, you look at what Japan's doing. You know, Japan putting massive amount of soft loans into Indian infrastructure and all over Asia. As Danny said, the Juncker plan, 16 billion euros of capital designed to de-risk projects in Europe. So I think the criticism is natural and probably comes from a number of the competitors who are looking to promote their own particular programs. I think, you know, the thing about One Belt, One Road is it's several magnitudes bigger than probably the other programs, and therefore will attract more attention.
I think the scale of the One Belt, One Road is both the excitement, you know, it creates the excitement and buzz around the project, but it also creates that wariness. Any sort of headlining brand that includes projects in as many countries as are envisaged in One Belt, One Road is bound to ask the question, how do you select the projects? Why do you select the projects? What are the projects there for? And I think that as One Belt, One Road matures and we begin to see the strategy behind it more clearly and the projects mature, then I think the criticisms, which at the moment are based out of ignorance, will start to fall away.
Jim?
我是从事环保工作的，3句话不离本行。我还是就环保。
talk about my own forte, and that is environmental friendliness. For One Belt, One Road, as we urbanize, as we industrialize, there are a lot of waste and solid waste, wastewater, etc., produced in these cities through urbanization and industrialization. and there is some 120 million tons of waste produced in this area, and it is growing at 3% per year for the One Belt One Road region, countries, as well as further. We own but one planet. This is our common home for the people of the world. We have to manage our home well. So whether it is for developing countries, and in particular for developed countries, this is something that we really have to pay attention to. In the past couple of years, we have been proactively pushing forward on the basis of One Belt, One Road to the developing countries' environmental protection projects, because this is a public utility project. Every environmental friendly project is a public utility project, I would submit. So as we promote this kind of projects to other countries, that is to say, the developed countries have this responsibility of promoting these projects, in particular in the four following areas. First of all, technical side. How do we allow these receiving countries to recognize our technology? Whether it is China or some of the European or countries or the US, what we need to resolve is the technology of it. Secondly, capital. Where does the money come from? Where does funding come from? As private enterprises, as we move on the development of One Belt, One Road, as we promote the development of One Belt, One Road, we have to look for good projects with public utility values. The funding, it should not be a problem. Funding will be forthcoming. But what is important is that the countries will have to come up with a model, an operable model for financing. And there will have to be a lot of communication, exchange, and also training and nurturing for the understanding of these operable models. For social capital to be put into the projects first, to build it up to a certain extent, and then have the other streams or sources of funding come in. This is one route. But at present, there is a situation, and I talk about two elements or points here. One, that is in the process of promotion, there are certain risks, policy risks, country risks, and also for certain areas, it is exactly raised by the UNECE, and that is corruption. That is another risk, another problem. All these problems need to be resolved and avoided. To be able to avoid these risks is also something that is a common subject, a common topic for us all. PPP, as we promote it with people as a people-oriented model, this would be a very important objective as well. And another point is that a lot of countries, a lot of cities also face this problem, and that is environmental protection, water, waste, solid waste, handling. These are not our backyard problems. How do we resolve effectively these issues? Well, that includes Hong Kong as well. The landfill in Hong Kong is quite full, and Hong Kong, of course, is a very small area, and it's a tiny city in a sense in terms of land area. And waste, there is still nowhere that we can develop more landfill. And to the burning of waste is something that is not publicly widely acceptable as well. The main problem here is the people. How do they trust? how do they build up that trust, and how do they buy the resolutions for handling this waste? That is something that is a common issue for all. It is more than just funding, and it is more than just technology. So that is another area that we have to look into. Thank you.
To tackle a lot of these issues, and all of you bring up some very crucial points there. Obviously, you want the best practices, you want environmental standards, you want social standards, social protections as well, which in the past, let's face it, infrastructure projects have displaced communities. There's been a lot of criticism about the kind of damage they do. So the other question was just the fact that One Belt, One Road, I believe it was described as something of a brand now. It's a brand with great political capital. And you've got lots of projects out there that don't quite necessarily fit the remit of One Belt, One Road. Just about everything's being described as One Belt, One Road, so that you can get the funding, you can get sort of the political backing as well. So tell us a little bit about the kind of projects that are required that you think for One Belt, One Road. What kind of projects will be truly transformational that will encompass some of these issues we were talking about earlier, the social and environmental protections? And if there are any projects you've got in the pipeline at the moment that you're working on, please tell us about it.
Wow, that's a question and a half. The idea of transformation has to be beyond single pieces of infrastructure. So we have to get beyond the idea that One Belt, One Road is a set of ports, or even it's a set of roads. What we need to be thinking about is how One Belt, One Road opens up markets. So what I want to be seeing, and some of the work we're doing through the Global Interconnectivity Alliance, is looking at how we can pull together strands of infrastructure to create much more than that. So many years ago I was working on a project in South Africa, which was a toll road project between Johannesburg and Durban. And one of the problems we had with that road was that it was pretty unpopular with the people who we did the road to, the areas we drove the road through. And so one of the things we looked at there was laying high-speed fibre along the road and then building small light industrial units by each of the entries to the road and creating jobs, but also opening up the ability of the local people to access high-speed internet. And that in itself turned the road from being something which people were dreading and were finding ways to subvert and finding ways to build routes around the toll plazas, and they actually became the biggest supporters of the road. And the road has been a very good success, and many of those light industrial parks have gone on to work. So I don't think One Belt, One Road is about the mega projects, which everyone will look at the headlines. It's about what happens around those mega projects. It's about taking roads and adding in high-speed fibre. It's about making sure that access to those roads leads through to economic areas, and it's about making sure that the roads don't go through countries, but they transform countries. So for me, One Belt, One Road is exciting because it crosses borders, and it's exciting because it's an opportunity to start linking the areas of untapped potential within the countries we're going to cross. The challenge for One Belt, One Road is that some of the countries it crosses through are countries where it will be very difficult to make this transformation happen. And that is the challenge, and that is where One Belt, One Road will really succeed or fail, is whether it can create those transformations and whether it can bring prosperity into countries where, you know, it's been hard to achieve.
James, I think you... Oh, sorry,
Can I add a few words on it?
Yes.
What are the good projects? I mean, this is really a good question. I want to add in a little perspective on this project selection side. And I think in terms of what are the good projects, you probably need to look into beyond a simple road, a simple bridge. In Hong Kong, if you look at our MTR operation, if we only build this MTR transit, probably it's not profitable and probably it's not sustainable. So the MTR, has a strategy. For example, they ask the government to allow them to build real estate. The income of the real estate in return support those projects. If you look at China, last 30 years, economic growth, China is not only building the roads. For example, when they build the roads, build a bridge, they think about industry parks. And along the road and along the bridges, along the port, they have industry parks. Industry park, they're also looking into, of course, when the companies moving, they're also looking into the so-called cluster effect. For example, in Dongguan, they are specialized in electronics. In other places, they specialize in other things. So therefore, what are the good projects? You probably need to look into beyond simple construction project. You need to look into an entire portfolio. Therefore, those projects can be sustainable, also help the local economy. Thank you.
Well, let's hear from James first.
Yeah, so projects is an interesting thing at the moment. I mean, I hope this weekend coming up we will get more clarity on the project pipeline. I suspect we're not going to, but I hope we do, because certainly when I talk to to a lot of the international companies who are looking at One Belt, One Road, they're very simple. They just want to know what the project pipeline is, which they can focus on, and that is not very visible at the moment. And what I personally hope we're going to see is projects that pick up Chris's point, that provide more investment in the local economy. I think, going back to your previous question, why are people slightly nervous about One Belt, One Road? Because historically, and there was an interesting article in The Economist about this last week, historically, Chinese investment has come into a country to build a road or build a port. The labor, the equipment and everything else has arrived on ships, and there's been very little investment in the local economy, and certainly very little legacy investment. And I think what a lot of countries want from these projects is projects that are going to build something big, but also invest in the local economy. And that might mean a housing project alongside, it might mean education projects alongside, but generally a more sustainable solution.
Thank you.
Can I just pick up on one area where infrastructure investment can be transformative, to pick up that part of the question, and it follows on from what Chen Xiaoping was saying earlier on, which is that over the next 25 years, our world will either succeed or fail in taking the steps that are necessary to tackle the rise in temperatures that flow from climate change. And the Paris Agreement has many commitments, nationally determined contributions made by many countries of steps that they're going to take to make their systems more sustainable, compatible with their own growth, their own stage of development, and so on. And infrastructure is at the heart of many of those things. Energy generation. How can countries make a transition towards more sustainable forms of energy generation? And that's, in many countries, that's in parallel with trying to extend access to electricity, access to services, which is also a vital part of the sustainable energy for all agenda. You can look at Asia and see the forecasts for the expected continued rapid urbanization of the population over the next 25 years. Some forecasts say maybe 1.6 billion Asians are expected to move into cities in that period. Will the cities that those people live in, which will be existing cities and new cities, will they be sustainable? Will they be livable? Will they be breathable? Will there be places where people can go about their business in a sustainable way? Infrastructure projects that enable those cities to be constructed in the right way, that enable that energy transition to take place in the right way in those countries, that enable transport to become more sustainable, will both support economic growth and the trade and development that Chris is rightly talking about, but which will also help to meet that climate change objective. And really, this is a very interesting period right now, because it's in this period now, in this 20-25 years, when the decisions we make will actually determine whether or not that challenge is met. And that's, I think, one critical way in which infrastructure projects, including One Belt, One Road, can be genuinely transformational. And of course, if they're not transformational, then we will all pay the price.
Yes. Let's hear from Ms. Wu. Yes.
I think when we talk about One Belt, One Road and money and other resources, we have to look at the human capital. And from Hong Kong's angle, the chief executive, Mr. C.Y. Leung, has been investing in, I would say, scholarships for students along the One Belt, One Road countries to come and learn from Hong Kong courses and also to get an exposure of working with different companies in mainland China. And I think this is what we try to offer, because when we try to invest in projects, we want it to be manageable and to be profitable in the long run. And from Hong Kong, we are trying to be not only the super connector, but the super educator, because we are bilingual, and also we have the temperament, how to work things out in different countries because of local customs and religion, and also the habit of working, which I think is very important when you want to make a success in any projects. And on the other hand, we have to look at, it's not only infrastructure project in the One Belt, One Road, it's how to have the shipment of goods, because certain projects that we know for certain Chinese companies, like investing in Kazakhstan, having a beef processing factory, and helping them to ship the produce back into mainland China. And so actually it's a win-win situation for bilateral trade, and then not only just investment, it's also enhancing the local employment and also helping people to have a better lifestyle. Because China, as President Xi Jinping says, we are having a peaceful uprising for China, because we never want to go over and conquer other countries. On the other hand, we want to help our neighbors to improve their lifestyle, because if they have a better lifestyle, it's also beneficial for China to enhance its middle class. And I think right now, for the last 30 or 40 years, since China has the open door policy, through Hong Kong, we have been not only investing in capital, but we also have been letting our companies in China to share our know-how and market skills. And a lot of things are very intangible that you cannot see, but you can see it has improved in the last 30 years in China. It's nearly 100 years of development.
Thank you, Ms. Wu. Mr. Chen, briefly.
我觉得“一带一路”的发展推进，需要以一种开放的心态，
We need
一
to
种
be
合作的心
broad-minded.
态。
We have to be alive to it, so as to achieve a win-win and mutual beneficial effect. The silks and China, from China, when they were exported in the history, it had engendered the industry of ceramics in Europe and in other places. And the European Industrial Revolution had also brought on the industrialization in China. So when we talk about One Belt, One Road and its countries, it has to be mutually beneficial, win-win kind of development mode. Thank you.
Thank you all. I'm looking at the time, and we have half an hour, and I do want to open it up to questions a little bit later on as well, but I think you all bring up some seriously important points here about the kind of projects we hope to see within One Belt, One Road. But as I sit here, I look behind me and I see there's a huge UNECE sign behind me, and it's crucial that we are here at the behest of, I guess, the United Nations. So perhaps none of you might be in a position to answer this, but because we do sit here on this stage with this poster behind us, it's interesting to ask why the United Nations is so interested in One Belt, One Road, and how this might be linked to the Sustainable Development Goals that they've listed out as well. And I know that later on in successive panels we might get an answer to this, but just maybe some viewpoints from each of you on how it all fits in. Yes, James.
As I sort of wear a UN hat. But I think, I mean, if Jeffrey was on the stage and someone from the United Nations on the stage, they would make a very simple point, that they want projects that are linked quite clearly to the criteria set out in the Sustainable Development Goals. And that moves you, that sort of swings the pendulum away from pure economic projects to projects that have a social environmental benefit, projects that remove poverty from this world, provide water for the first time to people, provide power to the first time to people. And going back to one of my earlier points, one of the fundamental challenges of those sorts of projects is they tend to have almost sometimes zero cash flow or certainly very limited cash flows, and therefore they require much greater government support. And certainly if you look at the pipeline at the moment, it is leaning towards power projects and ports projects and maybe the old airport. These are projects that have very strong cash flows. So I think from my perspective, with clearly wearing my UN hat, what I would hope to see is a proportion of those projects being linked quite clearly to the SDGs and quite clearly to social and environmental projects, and where the appropriate funding support is available to make those projects happen and bring them to the top of priorities.
Well, I guess moving on, we've talked a little bit about the environmental protections being crucial, the issues of corruption, which we hope to get into a little later as well. Of course, it's a huge risk for China to have this undertaking into developing countries, let's face it, where there are no such protections against corruption, and we'll get into this with the corruption panel a little bit later as well. But how do you ensure those protections are in place? How do you ensure that, you go into a country with a good project, with a transformational project, you hope, and you're somehow impervious to the corruption, or you somehow go in there to try to deal with the corruption? What would you do in that sort of position? Do you walk away from some projects, if that's the case?
I think one of the benefits of the PPP style program is greater transparency in procurement. And so, do you walk away? Well, the answer is yes, you should walk away. The more important point is, can it be made clearer where corruption happens? And when you look at the benefit infrastructure has, the IMF looked at some numbers and they said that for 1% of infrastructure, 1% of investment made in infrastructure in a country, you had a growth of between 1.5 times and 2.5 times their GDP. Now, if you are losing 30 or 40% of the value of the project through corruption, your chance of making a sufficient increase in GDP to pay for that project just disappears. So it is a massively important issue. It is something which drags countries down. So I don't have the answers, and I'm not going to pretend I do. But one thing that we have to strive towards is greater transparency in procurement, and I believe that PPPs take a step towards that transparency.
Danny?
Can I just answer the previous question and then say something about this one as well? Because I was trying to come in and then you quite rightly moved the conversation on, which is in relation to the UN role. I think that you can, certainly for the AIB, you look at the Sustainable Development Goals and we see much of our activity is driven by the same sentiment as the Sustainable Development Goals. You can actually also look at the experience of China. Over the past, 30, 40 years, China's economic development has been responsible for the largest reduction in poverty around the world in any country in world history. That development has been led by, amongst other things, a big focus on infrastructure investment as an engine for economic growth and raising living standards. And that's an experience worth talking about and worth exporting the good lessons from, as well as learning some of the needs to improve. But I think it also means that we should not be trying to think of this and say, well, there are some projects which are financially beneficial and there are some projects which support the Sustainable Development Goals. Actually, projects that support the Sustainable Development Goals, that for example help to support tackling climate change or increasing economic empowerment, bringing services to people who don't have them at the moment, be that power, sanitation, or whatever. Those things are also profitable, financeable projects if they're constructed in the right way. You're not trying to choose between the two. The Sustainable Development Goals, the ideas within them, can be built into what makes a good project. And that's, of course, as others have said, where PPP comes in. And it's also where transparency and high standards and anti-corruption come in. And certainly for the MDBs, the AIB and others, having, from the very start of any discussion about a project, very high standards in terms of integrity, in terms of the way that project sponsors operate, but also in terms of how you monitor the projects that you're financing throughout their life so that you can act on any problems that emerge. Of course, there's no perfect system, but making clear from the very start that this is an absolutely overriding priority for your organisation, and acting in that way is crucial. For the AIB, we've recently unilaterally debarred all of the companies who are debarred by the agreement amongst multilateral banks, so we will not work with those companies who've been found to be corrupt in their dealings with other multilateral development banks. Those sorts of actions send a very strong signal that you simply will not work with organisations that are corrupt, and those signals in turn, I hope, help to mean that the projects that come to you are ones where you can enforce those high standards.
Mr. Chen?
作为私营企业，其实我们也光大国际也作为一家公众公司。
Everbright International, we are also a public company. Every cent that we invest, belongs to the public. So the money that belongs to the public, whilst we are using it, we must remain responsible to the public and to our shareholders. Therefore, when we face the issue of corruption, etc., as the company itself, it must have its bottom line, and it must adhere to that bottom line. In addition, there must be very strict management and internal control. Only by doing so can we control ourselves well. At the moment, in terms of corruption issues, when it comes to investment, we take the zero tolerance approach. This is not only responsible for the company, but also for the public, for the shareholders. Thank you.
Trying to remember, thank you, Mr. Chen. Thank you for all your comments as well, because I was trying to remember what the other One Belt, One Road, OBOR, and of course Jeffrey mentioned it also stands for our benefit and our risks, because it is a huge undertaking. I guess what we've seen in the past when China has gone into other countries as well, particularly with the big Chinese development banks, perhaps there's been a need to go in to build a project, and there's often been sort of a bilateral agreement that China has with specific countries. So how do you ensure, with all the high standards that you're all stating are required from these projects, it's got to be, environment protections, it's got to have the best practices, it's got to have all of these hugely high quality projects that require a whole list of things. How do you ensure that perhaps there's sort of a multilateralism approach towards them as opposed to a bilateral approach? Do you think that would help ensure that you get the best projects possible?
我觉得
Sorry, don't all jump as
我觉得最简单的办法就是公开透明。
Is to be transparent and open. All your emission standards, you need to publicize them so that the public can supervise, to receive the supervision from society. And I believe that this is way more effective than any beautiful things that you can say and blow your trumpet.
I think we should make it clear that bilateral arrangements for big infrastructure projects are fraught with problems wherever they occur. So recently, in fact in 2004, in Spain, they built an airport using European money. It was an airport put forward by the local council. It was supposed to be the third Madrid airport, and it cost 4 billion euros to build, and it was built 300 kilometers outside of Madrid. It never had a railway to Madrid. It never had access to the main road that was nearby it. It operated for only 6 months, and recently it was sold for scrap for 28 million euros. That's a destruction of value of 39/40ths for a project that was badly specified, badly thought through, and was actually just the pipe dream of a local government. So the answer to the question is, I'm not so fussed about the bilateral versus multilateral approach. I personally believe multilateral is better, but I'm not fundamentalist about it. I do believe in the point you just made, which is unless you get the local people involved in the infrastructure, unless you get a true economic plan behind the infrastructure, then your chance of building something which is worthwhile, long-living, and creating the growth that we all crave is pretty minimal. So that, to me, is more important than multi versus bilateralism.
Okay. James?
Yeah, I agree with Chris. I don't think we should get hung up between bilateral and multilateral, but the fact is, in the market today, governments are seeking to promote and bias, I'm not, bias is too strong a word, promote their own suppliers by the offer of cheap money. And if a local supplier, and it doesn't have to be Chinese, it can be Chinese, Japanese, Korean, I say Asia because Asia are ahead of the game in this around the world compared to Europe. But if a supplier comes with cheaper money, then they have an inherent advantage, and that will push a procuring country towards a bilateral approach. And it's a clear strategy from many countries to get their suppliers into a sole source contract and a bilateral approach. Now, to me, the obligation is on the procuring country to set the rules of engagement, whether it's, I mean, you didn't mention ethical workforce, which I think is a massive issue at the moment, but to set the environmental standards, the standards around workers and everything else, and within that bilateral contract. And as I say, the obligation is on the procuring country first and foremost. I mean, just to pick a region we haven't talked about, this is a massive issue in the Middle East at the moment, where the Western contractors are trying to compete in the Middle East and feel that they are in an unfair situation because of the rules around workers, where they are obligated by their home countries and legislation by certain laws, and they feel their competition are not, and therefore they're finding it difficult to compete.
Good point. Yes, Mr. Yan.
我也回应一下刚才陈总说的这个三句话不离老本行，这个里面也有一个教育的问题。What I'm trying to say, there's always a component of the education. So zero tolerance on corruption and sustainable development is always with the component of the education. So at CTU and UNECE is also helping us, and we are going to taking 40 plus Chinese executives to UNECE and invite the UN to share their experience in the sustainable development the goals, and also putting the zero tolerance in corruption into classrooms. As educator, there's also an educational component in it. Thank you.
I think in line with Professor's comment, you can use the ICC in Hong Kong as an shining example. ICC is the Independent Commission Against Corruption. Was formed to try to, I would say, the first batch of people who were caught were the policemen in Hong Kong because there are too much corruption and bribery. But then it has become a very useful example for central government in Beijing to copy from Hong Kong. And throughout the years, I have served in the ICC 2 terms in Operations Review Committee. And we really look at all the cases. I would say MNC cases in Hong Kong occurred in Hong Kong, and also Chinese state-owned companies with cases occurred in Hong Kong. And we have been very successful in taking care of all the cases independently and with no interference from anywhere. So even nowadays, our former chief executive has been caught in a small case, and he was sued by the ICC. Put in jail and now on bail. But I think it's very important is the corporate governments and also the local government, and also how you can get the private sector to understand and appreciate, I will use the word independence against corruption. Like in Hong Kong, certain companies, we have to sign a piece of paper and to declare our interests. And I think Hong Kong, we have been using this, and we have been really put our hearts to do something. China as a country, because it's booming rapidly, so there are a lot of cases that the local government are not able to adopt the practice. But we also have been helping them to come to Hong Kong and understand ICAC. And we also have been sending government officials from Hong Kong to introduce the ICAC practice. And I think maybe City University with Professor Hao and the UNECE can help China to understand much more to apply the anti-corruption cases when they are involved in the One Belt, One Road cases.
Thank you, James.
Just quick, I mean, I didn't talk about corruption. I am slightly depressed about corruption at the moment because we were talking about this 2 years ago, and then the Brazil Lavato crisis blew up, and I thought that would be the turning point. But I think this supertanker is turning very, very slowly. And as Chris says, the cost estimates that I've seen range between 20 and 30% incremental cost as a result of corruption. I saw a figure about Europe, and people sensationalize corruption and think it's to do with particular regions. Well, the cost of corruption in Europe is equivalent to the total investment required in Africa on an annual basis. Yeah.
That is a staggering
I mean,
figure.
it's a staggering fact. I mean, and that's Europe. So I just hope that this tanker starts to turn. And my optimism is, if you look at tax, you look at the attitude to tax today compared to 10, 15 years ago. I mean, it was seen to be clever to avoid or whatever to avoid tax. Nowadays, it's seen as morally reprehensible, and the whole attitude, the whole cultural attitude has changed. And I don't quite see that change in attitude to corruption around the world today, and I think that's what we need.
Now, I'm wary of the fact that we have about, is it 10 minutes or, sorry, I need my reading glasses. We have about 12 minutes left in the conversation. So I would like at this stage, you've all been a wonderfully interested audience. You've all been paying attention as well, and certainly getting a great education from all our experts on this topic. So I thought I would open it up to the audience now. If you all have any questions you'd like to ask, and can I specifically state that you ask a question and not try to make a statement. I believe we have some mics roving around. Is that correct? Yes. There's a couple of questions. We've got a gentleman over there. The lady with the mic is just here. So there's a question here from Matthew, I believe. Yes, Martin, yes. Sorry.
Okay, so I know a lot was mentioned about the lack of funding and there are so many diverse projects, but we spoke a bit about selection, but what would specific selection criteria be? Do we go for the lowest apple on the tree, the one with the least risk, or do we start looking at cash flows? Or is there simply no model that you can use to select projects on every basis? Thank you.
Great question. Yes.
Thanks for the question. The Hub is working with the World Bank at the moment on a two-part tool. The first part of the tool is to allow prioritization of a stream of projects. This is a major issue for a number of countries who have a vast number of projects and don't know how to decide where to start doing those projects. And so the tool we're working on allows you to look at three different areas: the economic impact, the social impact, the environmental impact of a piece of infrastructure, and allows you to measure and score those. And that can then give you an initial starting point for prioritizing your projects. The second half of the tool then looks at the priority list and says, out of your 10 priority projects, these are the 5 that would be best to bring private finance into. So we are looking at this and trying to bring something which is easier to use than cost-benefit analysis.
Thank you. Anybody else want to respond to that? No, we're good. There was a question by the gentleman over there. Can the lady with the microphone get to the gentleman there? Yes, there's a man behind you. Yes, thank you. Is the microphone working? Do you want to try this one? Yeah, okay.
Yes, it's to everyone, but I would say it's more for Chris. I think the pipeline of investable projects, it's probably the biggest issue we all have. There are a lot of projects out there. There's a lot of excessive liquidity available. It's a question of identifying and prioritizing the projects. We're going to present tomorrow 10, but actually we are now at 60 case studies from UNECE, People-First PPP case studies. Shouldn't we all have a common base of these PPP case studies. We are looking into PPP case studies more on the asset management phase, so it's not a procurement issue, it's more a providing public service issue that we are trying to address. But the main point is, shouldn't we use also these forums to try to put all these pipelines together, talking with each other, so that at the end we can measure the outcome, and all these 2.5 trillion missing would see decreased? Thank you.
Would anybody like to respond to that?
Actually,
Once again, Chris.
I feel like I'm okay. Greater standardization, both in terms of information flows, the way that we procure projects, would have a massive, massive benefit. It is incredibly hard to do. It's incredibly hard for a single country to approach things on a more standardized basis. James and I worked tirelessly to standardize the UK model, and I think it brought down the time of procurement from 4 years to 2 years, which was still pretty rubbish. But that was a very painful process in a single country. Trying to standardize more broadly, incredibly difficult, but incredibly valuable. So that's certainly something that we are tasked with trying to do, tasked with trying to pull together the best practice for different forms of procurement and making that happen. And we've started that task by looking at the risk apportionment between the public and the private sector and putting forward a model that helps governments to understand better how to follow that approach. But it's only one step on a very long route. In terms of operational, we think this is the forgotten child of PPP. What happens when the bright lights are turned off, the project's been procured, and some poor person is left with a 400-page contract to manage? And we're looking again at how we can help support people in managing those projects, particularly when they go wrong. It's a massive area, and there's no easy answers, I'm afraid.
As well as project selection, which was the subject of the first question, project preparation is also incredibly important. Even countries that know what their priorities are, actually preparing a project to the standard at which it can be properly understood, can be financed, can apply to different organizations, multilateral banks or whatever for the financing they need, is also a huge challenge, because in many places the capacity simply isn't there to generate to prepare the project to the level that is necessary. And so part of the benefit of forums like this, where experience is shared, is to enable knowledge sharing about what has been a successful project, what are good features of projects. Even if you can't get to the point of full standardization, which I agree with Chris is highly desirable but very, very difficult to achieve, having some understanding of what worked in places where a project was able to be delivered successfully can help those who are working themselves to develop good projects to do so. The AIB has established a special fund for project preparation. It's the only part of our finance which is grant-based to the least developed countries in our membership, to help them take the steps necessary to prepare good quality projects. It's had financial support from the Chinese government and the UK government. Others will, I'm sure, come in. Other multilateral banks have similar facilities, precisely to try and deal with the issue, which seems to be at the heart of this kind of infrastructure funding paradox. There's a huge amount of need and a huge amount of money, and yet the two aren't coming together, which is to have more well-prepared projects coming forward that can attract the funding.
Thank you. James, and then Mr. Young.
Yeah, I suppose to me that the holy grail here is that we take a programmatic approach rather than an individual project approach, which is sort of what both Chris and Danny have been saying. And I don't think that means standardization, but it maybe does mean common features, or maybe it means One Belt, One Road as a program dictating certain criteria for the projects that are going to fall within it. And I know that AIIB and other multilateral banks are now looking at being more proactive in terms of saying to countries, if you want us to lend, these are the investment criteria you will have to fulfill. And then maybe off the back of that, creating what are now called investment platforms, which is where the multilateral becomes the anchor sort of tenant in a lending consortium, and then other people from the private sector hopefully come and join them. But they then set investment criteria. But I think the more we can move to a programmatic approach and a more transparent approach, then the faster the program will go, and the more, particularly the private sector, will be attracted to it.
Mr. Young, were you going to make a comment? No? Wonderful. Well, we're almost at the end, but I don't want to leave without actually getting some final thoughts from each of you, briefly, because we've only got a few minutes. But obviously, we've talked a lot about the kind of PPP projects that would be transformational in the One Belt, One Road, what needs to be done, these best practices, et cetera, et cetera. You know, it just comes with a huge list of priorities that need to be taken into account. But I guess a year from now, when China hosts its next One Belt, One Road forum, what kind of progress do you see achieved, particularly when it comes to People-First PPPs? A very simple question, but if you can keep it fairly brief, just as your last thoughts on this topic, and hopefully it'll be instructive for our audience as well.
I mean, I think the point that's come through in a lot of the different contributions here, which is what is the purpose of the projects, how do they fit into the Sustainable Development Goals, how do they support the environmental and social and economic sustainability agenda that we're talking about. I hope that's something that will come through very strongly, certainly in the work of the AIB and other multilaterals. I hope that this UN work will have also been able to bear fruit in terms of the training that was talked about earlier, the sharing of high standards and understanding of what PPP can do to support this agenda.
Thank you. Mr. Chen?
这是一个长期艰巨的工作，需要长时间推进解决。
Long-term piece of work. It needs long-term efforts. For PPP, People First. Every time we have these seminars organized by the UN, as we promote this kind of best practice for PPP around the world, there will be effects, good effects, and I wish that this seminar will have very good achievements right there.
From each of you, we haven't heard from? Yes, James. Oh,
very, very quick one. The first international bidders bidding on a One Belt, One Road project.
Okay, great.
Took the words out of my mouth. I would say, yeah, a clarity of pipeline. I think clarity of leadership also. I mean, again, it was something picked up in the Economist article last week. It is, you know, from a private sector point of view, they are slightly struggling to know who to talk to about One Belt, One Road. So I think clarity of leadership, which will bring in itself clarity of the framework and the program and everything else.
Thank you. Ms. Wu?
Okay. I think if they need to talk to someone in One Belt, One Road, they can come to see us in Hong Kong. We're always welcome. 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. Hong Kong actually is a place for business, and we want to get things done. And that's why our Chief Executive, Mr. Siwan, says Hong Kong is the super connector for business. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Mr.
Okay. I agree. This One Belt, One Road initiative is long-term projects, and which requires international communities' participation and support. And I believe this is the occasion, and we see this international audience try to work with this topic and work with China. And again, I echo Annie, Hong Kong can play a certain role. So we are very much looking into work with China and exercise Hong Kong's advantage, putting this One Belt, One Road initiative into a successful road. Thank you.
Thank you, all of you. And of course, the media will be leaping on to whom that first international investor is in this project. Thank you once again to all our wonderful panelists. A big round of applause. It's been a very engaging and instructive hour and a half. I hope you all agree, and you've all been a wonderful audience as well. Thank you for your questions and for your attention. Once again, a big round of applause to our wonderful panelists. And I believe I'm supposed to hand back to Martin. Thank you, Martin.
Thanks very much, Sharon Jit, and thanks again to our panel for the very interesting discussion. Now, I've been given the very difficult task of running you through all the lunch options. So if you look in your tag that you have, inside there you have a map, and on the other side is a bunch of options for catering where you can get lunch. So you have options for on campus, and you have options in Festival Walk, which is the mall just next door. But I've been told to run through a few on-campus options which would be most easiest. So firstly, we have AC3 Bistro, which is just 2 floors above us, and is giving you Western food and is probably the best option. Secondly, there's Deli France, which is a small, and I was told to emphasize, small coffee shop 2 floors down, so I don't think it can cater for everybody. The City Chinese restaurant in the amenities building has reserved 5 tables for members of our audience. And then I was told to emphasize that we only have 90 minutes for the break. So if everybody could please make sure that they are back for our next debate, which is on corruption, which I think is a very big issue, and we look forward to having that debate.